David Ross is a young teenager who lives in Jerusalem, but is originally from England. He's lived in Israel for many years, and I spoke to him about his move to the land. The first question I asked him was how old he was.
I'm 14. I'm going to be 15 in 2 days, actually.
How long have you lived in Israel?
Me and my family came here when I was 5.5 years old, and been here ever since. And we visited. As you can probably hear from my accent, we came from England, and we visited back in England quite a few times, but this has been our home for the past nearly going on 10 years.
So was it easy leaving England to come to a new land and a new culture?
Well, I can say it certainly wasn't easy. I know that a lot of believers or Christians who have come to the land have found it a lot more difficult than I have personally. As a child, I found it, I think, a lot easier to readjust to things here than a lot of people have, and we've had various problems which I'll mention later, but I think for me, apart from leaving all the family and friends, I think I adjusted pretty well, and by God's grace I managed to readjust. I was accepted in a lot of the circles that we were in. I was put into a small messianic school, Makora Tikva, which at the time was only about 16 children in the school, and it was a bit of a sheltered environment which allowed me to pick up the language as well quite easily, rather than having to be put into a public school, which would have been a lot more difficult for me.
So what was the hardest part of actually coming to a new land?
I think for me, leaving all the family and friends behind and having to pick up new people, but as I said, I was very well accepted in our congregation, which was King of Kings. They accepted me, and at Makora Tikva, which was the school which subsequently my father is part of the management team of the school at the moment, and the school's grown from about 16 children to nearly 100, so God's really blessed the school.
So why did you come and actually move to Israel?
Well, my father's Jewish, and there's a bit of a story to it though. My parents married about 25 years ago, and about 5 years into their marriage, my mother felt this deep calling from the Lord to come to Israel. She wasn't Jewish, but she'd been to Israel a few times before. This was where she'd accepted Jesus as her Saviour, and this has always been a special place for her, but she felt that our whole family was being called to come to Israel, and it took my father about another 10 years to really pick this up. I mean, he's the Jewish one, but he didn't have the calling, and he came here about a year before we decided to move here, and he was asking the Lord, he was basically telling the Lord that he didn't want to come to the country, but if God wanted him to come, then change his heart, and God changed his heart, and our whole family came here a few months later.
Now, was it easy for you to learn Hebrew coming to a new land?
I think I know for me, I picked up the language as a 5.5-year-old pretty well. Also the school, the small environment, and the Christian environment that I was already used to from England helped me pick it up, but for me, learning the language hasn't been too much of a problem, and although I know that a lot of people in the land, including my parents, have found it a lot more difficult, and even though my younger brother and sister, they've found it even more difficult than me, I guess Lord really sheltered me and protected me to allow me to learn the language. My parents are still learning the language and picking it up, and my younger brother's doing well. My sister, who was actually born here, she's finding it more difficult. I think they say that if you have a good background in one language or in your mother tongue, then helps you learn your second language more easily, and I'd been in school for a year in England before coming to Israel, so learning Hebrew as a 5.5-year-old, it came pretty easily.
So what difficulties has your family faced by coming here?
We found, compared to a lot of people, our story of coming to Israel has been a lot more, I wouldn't say more easy, but a lot more peaceful, and the Lord's really brought us through it as a family together really well. I'd say the main difficulty we faced as a family is the government, because my father's a messianic believer, a Jew who believes in Jesus. Then they see it, the Orthodox Jewish community, they often see it as a threat to have they don't have so much of a problem of regular Christians, but to have a Jew who actually believes in Jesus, they see that as a threat to the rest of the Jews, and they see if one person of their community comes to know Jesus, then they're afraid that more people would. So, and the Shas party, which is the mainstream Orthodox party, they were in control of the Ministry of Interior, so they gave us quite a lot of problems. And only 8 years, which is 2 years ago, into our time in Israel, we got a proper long-term legal status here. A lot of the time we were here either illegally or we were asking for some sort of visa, and when they turned us down, we'd ask for something new. So most of the time we weren't here illegally, and a couple of times the authorities or the Ministry of Interior, they asked us to leave the country, and we considered doing it, but we felt, and we were also supported by the leaders in quite a few of the congregations here, we were supported by them to stick in to what we believed was right, which was to stay here, and they really supported us in that. So we stayed here, and about 2 years ago I was saying that we got our first legal status, which was temporary residence, and God really gave quite a miracle for that to occur with one of my father's relatives. As I said, he was Jewish, and about my father's mother, she has cousins who live in the country, and they have quite a big family, and one of them actually helped us out, and he had some personal connections with the Minister of Interior, which was quite a miracle, and that allowed those doors opened, and that allowed us to get our temporary residence here.
So quite a few answers to prayers then.
Yeah.
Now, what's your prayer for this nation, this land, the people here?
So my prayer is that all Israel will be saved, and that the Jews will be able to live alongside the Palestinians in peace. And I know that won't happen completely until Jesus comes, and that as many people as possible would come to know him.
If you'd like to know more about Israel and the Palestinian territories, or make a comment about the program, then email me at focusonisrael@hotmail.co.uk. Focus on Israel is all one word. God is bringing his people back to the land, but life here is not easy. But with Jesus in our hearts, we can fight on, because we have the real Shalom peace.